Welcome back to our panel discussion, the business case for cloud computing in the federal government, sponsored by ViON Corporation and Hitachi Data Systems Federal Corporation, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Pamela Dyson, the Chief Information Officer at the Securities and Exchange Commission, Andre Mendes, the Director of Global Operations for the Broadcasting Board of Governors, Harrell Watkins, the Acting Chief Technology Officer at the Environmental Protection Agency, and Rich Campbell, the Cloud Solutions Architect at ViON. And before the break, we were talking about the issue of stakeholders and bringing who it is to the table that needs to be brought before you can start to build this business case for cloud. And Pamela, you were the next one to answer that one.
Yeah, so our experience at the SEC is similar to both Andres and Harrell. We certainly bring in the business first because they help us build the requirement. They will know the business use of the data as well as the criticality and sensitivity around the data, which helps us to determine how we're going to deploy the solution. For us, if we implement our strategy the way we intend, it should be transparent to the customer in terms of whether it's externally hosted, internally hosted, if it's on our infrastructure on a third party. We just want to meet a business requirements. We also bring in, of course, a security team because, again, a lot of what we do is around sensitive data. We bring in our acquisitions folks to make sure that the strategy we're using to acquire these services are in sync with federal mandates and requirements. So we bring in the business, we bring in the legal staff, we bring in the security staff, and then the technical team makes the decision in terms of how and what platform we're going to deploy the solution.
Okay. And so, Richard, do you find that when customers have done this kind of homework internally, it really makes them more reliable and easier to deal with as a customer, I imagine?
Absolutely. And that's typically one of the biggest struggles for most integrators is, how do we really put our hands around the applications, the security, right, the business processes. And those are typically where most companies end up getting bogged down as we're helping our customers move to cloud infrastructure is, how do we help them, fix a lot of the problems that really have nothing to do with the technology, and moving to the cloud, they really become more business process, right? That seems to be the long pole in the tent most of the time.
All right, and before we get to the next business issue, which is kind of supplier evaluation, I wanted to ask about the topic of application dependency, because applications are no longer bolted to the database that's related to them and them only. And then, as Andre mentioned earlier, in the time sharing, you unload that one and unload and then reload the next application in its database. Everything is talking to everything nowadays in this big data world, this multi-source world, the app world, and so on. You have multiple data sources. Is that a factor, and can it be a factor in making people nervous about cloud adoption, that whole issue of application dependency? Harrell?
Absolutely, particularly when you take a look at a lot of your legacy applications, particularly in the financial arena, where there's a lot of integration points within a data center context. It can be very challenging to, technically kind of unwind that and determine where there are opportunities to move to the cloud, and then two, making your customers comfortable. They know specifically where their information is, they know where the hardware is, they know who has control over it. Letting go of that sometimes can be challenging.
I suppose someone that may own a database that is accessed by an application they don't own, they see their data flowing outside somewhere to a cloud that maybe they weren't really part of. So that's probably an issue that may take some convincing.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Andre, what's your experience been?
Yeah, we have not experienced a lot of that, mostly because, we had such an antiquated set of applications that we just leapfrogged the whole thing. And so there are a couple of our applications that we really cannot cloud, but for a very different reason. When you deal, for example, with high-definition video and editing of that, just the amount of bandwidth that is necessary in order to, for that to be properly operated precludes that from being hosted out there in the field, in the cloud. But in terms of the rest of the applications and the fact that they are interconnected, you have to make sure that you have a right strategy from a metadata standpoint. So that whether those touch points take place within your data center, whether they take place completely outside of your data center elsewhere, or in a hybrid situation, as for example our SharePoint application, the protocols are pretty well defined in terms of establishing the point-to-point context, the VPNs that assure that networking connectivity is there, and as long as there's not a latency issue and you're properly provisioned from that standpoint, I have not seen any obstacles to, doing either, all in, all out, or half and half. You just got to make sure that your networking is properly provisioned.
Pamela, that's your experience, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, that's somewhere in between. Certainly, our mission-critical applications we keep close. A lot of those are enhanced, modernized, based on rulemaking for us. So there's a lot of hands-on with the application. The other part of our strategy is to, because we're such a data-centric organization, is to build platforms where we have a single authoritative data repository that we can leverage for multiple purposes. So if we were to move an operation like that to the cloud, we would have to move the entire infrastructure so that multiple units and multiple business cases could use that same data. We've built data warehouse, we built an Oracle platform internally to do just that, so we can leverage data across multiple disciplines. It's not that you can't do that in the cloud, but right now, again, with the sensitivity of data and the comfort level of sharing that data across different platforms, for us, that's worked better internally than externally.
So it's not necessarily a technical issue, it's just a comfort level issue.
It's a comfort
that
level,
the owners
and
have.
it's a business case issue, yes.
Right, so Rich, you must see that a lot.
I do. As a matter of fact, that's probably one of the things that has helped us be successful, right, is really it boils down to understanding your customers, right, and understanding their mission, how they work, the processes they have in place. And a lot of that is really the biggest impact on, how to move to the cloud. And it dictates a lot of the success, right, is when you really understand how your applications work, how the flow works, what the business process is, the security models, even from a vendor perspective, right, helping those agencies understand those key pieces or working with them to understand those key pieces is really a big part of moving to the cloud.
All right, so when it gets to moving to the cloud, let's talk about suppliers for a minute in general, not specifics necessarily. And I'm going to make an assumption that we can get past the discussion of whether clouds are secure. I mean, we talked about that 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. But now we have FedRAMP and the marbles that were put in on one end or coming out the other end of that FedRAMP process. And there's even higher levels than the security levels guaranteed by FedRAMP. So let's put that aside. And if I shouldn't, let me know. But I'm going to start there. And I want to know what it is you look for in a cloud supplier as you begin to build that business case. Pam?
So for us, again, it would be a continuation of at least the level of service that we can provide internally to the customer. So we haven't talked expressly about SLAs, but SLAs are important. The other things that are important, even though we talk about security, disaster recovery is an important part of security. So that if in the event that we have to recover data, the speed that we can do that and the integrity in which we can do that is also key. I believe that for the most part, most of the cloud providers, when we're looking at cloud providers, certainly the FedRAMP providers, they've already been vetted. But a part of that process, too, is that eliminates a lot of the other smaller solutions if they aren't FedRAMP certified. So if you take an approach, we're only going to deal with FedRAMP certified providers, you're also eliminating the opportunity. Those are the bigger dogs on the block. The cost is going to be higher with some of those organizations, albeit, they're more experienced at doing it, but your cost goes up significantly. It eliminates another group of providers at another tier that could also meet some of your lower level requirements. So, but certainly we have gotten past the security hurdles. I will say, though, that there is security within the cloud. I'm not necessarily sure all the time the pipeline to the cloud is as secure. So data in transit is very key to us, especially when you're dealing with sensitive data. Once it's at rest in the cloud, we're pretty sure it's secure, but getting it back and forth and moving that data, transversing it back and forth is also a key of something that we look for.
And do you make site visits?
We make site visits. We also work with our acquisitions office to get the vendors to come in, give us capability statements and so forth.
What do you look for if they let you in, past the lobby, the conference room?
Well, we look for security. We look for the environment itself, how well protected the environment is. Again, they've gone through all of these hurdles with GSA and the federal government, so we believe that the physical and logical security is there. But really is a business discussion and your comfort level with them being able to execute your business at the service level that your customers expect.
All right, so if you see open loading docks and you can
that
see
would
the
be
servers beyond there, probably
that
that's
would be a problem.
That's
probably not a good business case. Exactly.
Okay. And Andre, it sounds like you left the equivalent of a 54 Buick on the lawn and just skipped over upgrading that and went to a whole new, as you said, structure. Mm-hmm. And so the critically important streaming that is done by the BBG is done in the cloud. So what do you look for in a supplier, and also what do you look for in a site visit?
The reliability is definitely something that's got to be there. Just a quick point about the security, right? I always found it interesting that we talked about security in the cloud as being very, very important, almost in a sort of a contrast to the fact that security internally would be always a given. And as demonstrated by the headlines on a regular basis, right, security internally is not a given whatsoever, right? You have the same challenges that people have everywhere. In our particular case, we're constantly under attack by the Chinese, by the Chechens, by the North Koreans, by the Cubans, by, all of the people out there that want to bring us down. So security for us is probably better done outside, quite honestly. Now, when it comes to vetting vendors, quite honestly, we're so small as an agency. We're about a budget about $750 million. So with some of the agencies that you're talking about here, really small. We take what I call the Wendy's model, right? You figure out where McDonald's built a restaurant and you put one right across the street. So, what we do is we rely on FedRAMP, we rely on other agencies basically doing a lot of the vetting. And then if it's good enough for somebody like the EPA, for somebody like the SEC, we believe it's going to be good enough for the BBG. And that has served us well. But the certifications are going to become absolutely paramount, right? Nobody's going to take the risk unless a provider has that certification that allows you to, should something just totally unforeseen, a disaster happen, allows you to go in front of the board and basically say, listen, we made a decision based on this, and this, and that is a sound business decision, but sometimes things go wrong. But, you have yourself protected because you made a decision based on a set of criteria that are generally accepted to be, the right criteria for that decision to be made.
All right, Harrell, what's your approach to vendor evaluation and site visits and kind of getting that comfort level such that, they can support what you need?
Right. First of all, generally, the first thing really for me, it starts with requirements, right? Understand the requirements of your customer, what they need, and what they're trying to achieve. The second piece, obviously, FedRAMP is very critical. Ensuring that the vendor has gone through that process, coupled with your own agency process for ensuring to get to a authorization to operate is critical. The other piece there is also understanding, getting what I call looking at reference implementations or other customers that have used the service. That is where I have found I've gained the most knowledge about other cloud providers. Case in point, when the EPA migrated its email over to the Microsoft Cloud back in 2013, we were one of the first agencies in there. So a lot of agencies came to us, say, what did you do? How did you do it? What are some of the lessons that you learned? What, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? Right? And so going to other agencies and understanding, well, what did you do? What are some of the lessons learned? And what are some of the issues to look out for? The last piece I also think is important, particularly once you get past kind of an implementation standpoint, is the partnership. You got to have the partnership with your cloud provider to ensure a level of service that you want.
Okay. And I guess, Rich, we want to get back to you now on this question of, how do you put your best foot forward, and what do agencies tend to ask you, and what do they want to see, in approaching people that are going to help them with cloud implementation?
I think a lot of it from my perspective is really, it's that intimacy model, right? It's, how well do you know me? How well do you know my business? How well do you understand what I do on a day-to-day basis? And, more importantly, how well do you understand the data and the data paths that I have to take? So I think it's critical. It's of critical importance for the vendors to not just know their customers, but to also understand the challenges their customers face, right? So things like, FISMA and FedRAMP and all these pieces that we have to abide by. It's understanding the process, understanding why the process is there, and then more importantly, how does it really impact the agency, and how do we help the agencies move forward through those processes? Because even while we have to abide by the processes and the procedures that are there, there's still new and emerging technologies that aren't in there yet. So how do we help our agency, brethren, adopt new technology and continue to move forward while still adhering to some of the legacy systems, right? To some of the legacy security standards.
All right, let's talk about SLAs, because that's an important part of the whole business case and really the central thing that you're buying. And Pamela, let me start with you. What are the elements that go into your SLAs? And then a secondary question is, how do you balance what you might need uniquely versus maybe the standard levels that are offered by the cloud provider that could save you money if you didn't try to customize them?
Right.
So how does that all work?
So again, it gets down to the criticality of requirement and the data. But certainly we build SLAs based on those that are going to be most effective. and those that are going to have benefit to us, and that they are measurable, and that we can understand whether or not we're getting the service level that we want. So, we have certainly key performance indicators that we need to meet. So we have systems that have to be up and running 100% of the time. If we're within a filing season or a time frame to do filings, EDGAR must be up at all times, for example. So that's one of the requirements. One of the things when we talk about bringing the stakeholders in, one of the things we look at are those service level agreements and what are those key performance indicators to make sure we're meeting those metrics. So a part of it is, but we also don't want to build, because a part of this is we also have to measure and monitor those SLAs. And so we don't want to build unnecessary SLAs. It takes a lot of resources, administrative overhead, and so forth to maintain SLAs that are not useful to us. So the key is what is useful, which SLAs will give us the most benefit, how can we track and monitor that we're getting the service level quality for our customers that we deserve, and then if we're not doing it, what are the challenges, or what do we have put in place to ensure that we can get that service level up.
And as you mentioned during, say, EDGAR filing seasons, uptime and availability is really key, because you've got 10,000 corporations an hour sending that in. And so, do you use your measurements? How do you measure, for example, the fact of availability? Do you use the vendor's measurement system? Do you have a third party?
So no, we would use ours based on our requirement, right? So we would use basically. When we go out to a vendor and we set out SLAs, they would not be, if anything, we would be looking at more aggressive SLAs from a third party. What we do is we look at what service we provide today at what level and how we can improve upon it, certainly substantiate that. But if there's an opportunity to improve upon that, we look for that as well.
All right.
So that's a part of the evaluation process. If the vendor is saying we can only operate within this level of service, well, that's a consideration we would take before we select that vendor.
All right, we're going to get to talking to our other guests about SLAs, but right now we're going to take a short break. Our guests today are Andre Mendes, the Director of Global Operations for the Broadcasting Board of Governors, Harrell Watkins, the Acting Chief Technology Officer for the EPA, Rich Campbell, the Cloud Solutions Architect at ViON Corporation, and Pamela Dyson, the Chief Information Officer at the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. Our panel is the Business Case for Cloud Computing in Government, sponsored by ViON Corporation and Hitachi Data Systems Federal Corporation, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.